Now that title may have seemed clickbaity, which it is. It generally is, but this is part of one of the weirdest part of Indiana Jones lore. That's considering Indiana Jones lore is essentially the equivalent of, it's essentially, whatever you can think of. It's essentially reading how crazy indie lore is. And how it essentially takes from whatever it can find. This is one of those craziest stories, especially reading out where it came from. Reading out was from during the 2008 era of Indiana Jones when Indy was back and cool, and yeah. At least it didn't go through the 90s stuff as and didn't have to try. Recently, they didn't have to try and be edgy on Superman for the last 15 years. But yeah, just say. And this comes from the Indiana Jones comic when Christmas goes, was called Indiana Jones and the Tomb of the Gods. Now, I have read this comic, and it's one of the only other pieces of expanded indie media that I have read. And it's not too bad. It's actually good. It's pretty good. And that's considering I would, especially reading out, this is also going to have to be in the artifacts of Indiana Jones, because the artifact in this is one of the weirdest case scenarios. So basically, a bunch of guys in the early 1930s find this thing that could change history. And then Indy was randomly having one of the weirdest days of his life. When he held a hostage about Nazis just because they presume that he knows about this weird stone thing. And in these I have no idea what you're talking about. It's quite literally that. And then later on, after he escapes from the Nazis, this old guy who was one of the archaeologists who found it and found this weird stone piece that could change history. And also, this isn't going to be a full reveal, because you could probably find that somewhere else if you wanted a full reveal, but yeah. And that's considering some good old indie fashion eventual shenanigans happen. And that's with Nazis eventually shooting the archaeologist that has the piece in his hands. Then after he dies in these and then he falls to death and tells Indy to make sure that doesn't fall into wrong hands or else. Then Indy, after escaping, decides to go back to Connecticut and explains to Marcus what happened, and both of them agree on go to Asia, to go to East Asia, where they find this. It's now before everybody presumes this is what the average probably drug draws. This is presumably supposed to be ancient language, and it also has somewhat of a Lovecraftian vibe. Foreshadowing. But yeah, and then more indie shenanigans happen, as I already said. I am not doing a full review of this comic because, I'm not that kind of guy who reviews stuff. And even if I do, it's more or less just kind of more of a retrospection, because I'm gonna make probably a 1 hour, probably a very long video about Supernatural for the 20th anniversary. But yeah. But then towards the end of the comic, we finally get the artifact, and it's this. Now this is a temple. And it's one that looks like a lot, that looks very Lovecraftian, you could say. And because I feel like this would be under the definition of Lovecraftian other than Cthulhu. And it's very weird seeing this in an indie story. Now, this comic did came out like only, I think, a few months after Crystal Skull. It came out in 2008, and somebody could correct me, but this temple kind of hints it has some kind of connection towards Cthulhu, which is just weird when you think about that. Because, like, it's... especially that means Cthulhu existing in the Indiana Jones universe, maybe. It just has some kind of weird connection. It just looks some kind of Lovecraftian thing. I don't like with most of the old indie artifacts where they more go religious or mythology. So something like either religion or mythology. Also, with this, they go straight up even more horror fiction than, even more sci-fi than even like, it's just one of the weirdest indie store, at least just in general, and it's kind of weird if that is generally supposed to be something connected to Cthulhu. That means Cthulhu canonically exist in the Indiana Jones world, and I have no idea what I feel about that. So yeah. It's strange. But yeah, any indie story, this is one of the weirdest, generally. And so yeah. But that's considering I do. But I still generally like the story, and yeah. And that's considering this is also counts as a artifacts video, because I will probably never do I have thought about doing artifacts of Indiana Jones of Temple of the Gods, just because I have the comic book since I was like 10, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna do that, and then I realized, nah, just because how weird it is, and I don't know how I would actually do it. So generally I don't know how I would do it. So, yeah. But that's considering considering the comic is good. And somebody who hasn't really has been trying to delve much more into the Indie franchise, as Indiana Jones has grown to be one of my favorite movies over the last few years. Then, yeah, I'm probably going to do a lot more these kinds of videos of delving into the Indie expanded universe, but yeah, and that's just for now, archaeologists. Like and subscribe if you like this video, and see you on a next eventual.